Hi, I'm Bob Tabor with Developer University. For more of my training videos for beginners, please visit me at devu.com. In this lesson, I'm going to introduce a new decision statement in Visual Basic. The if and the conditional, the IIF methods work great with a limited number of use cases, but when you begin to evaluate many potential cases, and you need to branch off in one of, 10 or a dozen or 2 dozen different directions, then the if and especially the IIF method, they start to become cumbersome. They're very wordy and they're very flexible and powerful, but it might be overkill for that particular situation. And I'll show you an example here in just a moment of where it makes sense maybe to use a new decision statement called the select case. But first, I want to talk about a special data type called enum, and specifically, what I said earlier with regards to working with data as a programmer. You typically want to restrict the values or restrict the kind of data that can be stored in a variable, or any kind of data that you're working with. So admittedly, we're already limiting the kind of data that you can store in a variable given its data type, right? But even within the data type, I might want to limit the possibilities to just a few options, a few possible values. So typically, again, in software development, you want to limit and constrain your data to ensure its validity and its usefulness within the software system. So an enumeration or an enum is a data type that limits and constrains all possible values to only those that are valid for our application. So we may want to keep track, for example, of a series of to-do items. We might be creating a to-do app, and each to-do item could be represented by an instance of this to-do class, as you can see here in my Understanding Enumerations project. So, we might want to keep track also of the current status of an item, and maybe it should only be one of several different statuses, like maybe not started or in progress or on hold or completed. Now, as I'm going through and I'm developing my application, I certainly could use a string and then start comparing strings against each other. But the problem with strings is that you can potentially mistype a string. And so especially if it's going to be input by an end user, there might be some fat fingering, or they may not spell it correctly, or you within your own software development efforts, you might not have typed it correctly in one spot and subtly introduced a little bug whenever you're checking to see, if my to-do dot status equals not started, something like that. In this case, as it's represented right now, you might miss the fact that you are missing a T there, and this would never get executed. So you typically don't want to work with strings when you're doing comparisons. These are often called magic strings because they hold values, and because of the flexibility of a string, it can hold any value. But it might not make sense in our application, and so you typically want to constrain values, not use strings for purposes like this. Anything like maybe a title or a description, sure, use a string because you want that to be any potential value. But a status, you want to limit statuses to only a few possible statuses because you might be doing some business logic based on the current status, right? So an enumeration will help us by eliminating all of the possible values to just a few possibilities. So in this case, what I could do is to actually create a public enum and call it to-do status. And then I'll just type the possible values for a to-do status. So here we'll go not started, and you can't put spaces in between these. I might be able to use a dash or an underscore, but I'll just go ahead and use camel casing, in progress, on hold, completed, or deleted. And those are the only options for to-do status. Now I'm going to change the status of my to-do class from a string to type to-do status. And notice that this is almost like a data type in and of itself. I can use it as a data type for my variables or my properties inside of a class. However, it's constrained and it can only be certain values. Now notice that behind the scenes, not started is equal to 0, in progress equals 1, on hold equals 2. So if we were to save this to a file or save this into a database, what would be stored in the database is 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4 in the case of deleted. So it's 0 based, and each of these options have a value from 0, in this case, to 4. However, when it's being used here in our application, we can do something a little safer than what we currently are doing now. We could do to-do status dot, and we can only select one of these items from the list of possible enumerated values. So now I can do a safe comparison and see does my to-do status equal to-do status, and you can see here in IntelliSense the options, not started. Okay, and in that case, now these types, they're strongly typed. I know that it can only be one of these 5 statuses, and it can never be something else, and I can never fat finger it, because at runtime or at compile time, it'll do that type checking and make sure that if we come up with something crazy like something crazy, or we just were to type it incorrectly, we're not even going to be able to run the application. It's not going to build. It's going to give us a compilation error because something crazy is not a member of the to-do status enumeration. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Enumerations are used all over the place in the .NET framework. For example, the console window or the console class has a foreground color, and you can set that to one of several different enumerated values defined in an enumeration called console color. So I could make this, for example, dark red, and then whatever I type in, so console.writeLine, and we'll say hello world, and then console.readLine, it'll be limited to just those colors. You can see hello world, very dark red, just those colors defined in the console color enumeration. All right. So again, enumerations are a very good thing whenever you're working with data because it limits the possible values. Let's go ahead and create another quick example here, working with a different data type instead of to-do items. Let's work with superheroes and create a little application that allows us to see for a given superhero what their nickname is. And so I'm going to add another class to my existing project, and I'm going to call that class superhero. And in the superhero class, actually, I'm not going to make it a class. I'm going to actually just make this an enumeration. So I'll just make variables of type superhero, not an entire class. So to change a class into an enumeration, you just change the word from class to enum, and then you start typing the names of superheroes like Batman, Superman, Green Lantern, and so on. Okay. And then here in our main program, what we'll do is ask the user to type in a superhero's name to see his nickname. And we'll go console.readLine, and we'll set that into a user value as string equals console.readLine. Okay, so now we have the user value, and what I can do is attempt to compare that to one of the possible values here. So I'm just going to do an if statement to begin with, but we'll come back and we'll replace this with something a little superior to an if statement. So if user value equals, we could just use magic strings, right? And say if it equals Batman, then console.writeLine, Caped Crusader, or Dark Knight, or one of the other nicknames Batman has. All right, but we don't want to do it this way. Again, because we don't want to work with magic strings. We want to work with enumerations instead. And so there's going to be a little bit of a disconnect, because whenever we get content from the user, we're going to have to try and convert that into one of the enumerations. And if it doesn't convert, then we're going to need to let the user know that there's an issue. So what we're going to do is use this if superhero dot, and then we're going to do this try parse method of our enum, and I'm going to give it the user value that was typed in, and I'm going to try to let's look at the second version of this. Yeah, I'm going to ignore the case, and then I'm going to attempt to convert that into a into my value. Now I haven't created my value yet. Let's go ahead and dim my value as superhero. Okay, so what we're going to attempt to do is take the user value that they typed in, and we're going to try and parse that string that they type in into a type of superhero. And if we can do that successfully, then we'll go ahead, we'll go if my value equals superhero dot Batman, then console dot writeLine Caped Crusader, else if my value equals superhero dot Superman, then console dot writeLine Man of Steel, else if my value equals superhero dot Green Lantern, then console writeLine Emerald Knight, I believe. All right. And I think it's complaining because it wants things on separate lines like this. And if. All right, and then console.readline. And so let's run the application. And we'll type in a superhero's name, and I'll just say Batman, and it types out Caped Crusader. Now, obviously, I don't have a lot of checking here, because if I put in Wonder Woman, I'll get nothing because we're just skipping over this. We were not able to successfully parse what the user typed in and convert it to one of the enumerated values. All right. And this is not that great of an example, admittedly, because we're allowing the user to type in and then we're having to attempt to convert it. But I just wanted to show that concept of how you would do it. The to-do example is probably something you're going to find more often, because you'll have complete control of the data, and you may want to present the data options to the user in some sort of either selection, select 1 for Superman, 2 for Batman, or some drop-down list box in a web-based interface or in a Windows user interface, whatever the case might be. But let's go ahead and just leave this the way that it is for now. And what I want to do is come back to this example in just a little bit, because I'm going to pair this up with the new, with a new type of decision statement. Instead of using the if, we'll try something else, which will be a little bit more elegant than what we did here. All right, so I wanted to introduce a new decision statement, the select case statement. The if then else if, else, end if. It's really powerful. You can do a lot of really cool things with it. However, if you need to do something simple, it can sometimes be overkill. Here's an example of something you can do which with the if statement that is actually pretty interesting. So I'm going to show you a complex if statement example. And you should be able to find that in the code folder wherever you're currently watching this video. And so as you can see here, I can do some interesting things like use ORs inside of my if statements to look for ranges of things. So in this case, if the value that the user types in is less than 1 or greater than 100, I can give some specific feedback that the option that they chose was out of the normal boundaries. Now, if they select specific numbers, 42 or 23 or anything greater than 90, then we can give them a message that you found one of the special numbers. Otherwise, you didn't find one of the special numbers. So we can get pretty complex using the or and the and, like we saw at the very outset when we were looking at various operators. And here, let's just choose like 86. You didn't find one of the special numbers, but if I type in 23, you found one of the special numbers. Okay, very simple example, but you can see that with an if statement, you can get very complex and test a lot of different cases. Let's close that down and close that out. What I want to do, however, is create a new project. So let's save what we have here in Understanding Enumerations. And we'll go File, New Project, and we're going to create one called Understanding Select Case. And let's create a similar example to what we did before, except we're not going to use enumerations this time around. So console.writeLine, and then type in a superhero's name to see his nickname. All right, and then let's go dim user value a string equals console.readline. And then now we're going to use select case. And I'm just going to hit select tab tab, and you can see the format of a select case statement. And so what we'll do is evaluate this user value. And in order to make sure that we are comparing apples to apples, I'm going to call the toUpper function like so. So that, and here I'm going to hit tab, we can select and check for Batman, for example, or for Superman, for example. And I could continue to add additional cases like Green Lantern. All right. Now here I can just do, the console.writeLine and type in caped Crusader, console.writeLine, Man of Steel, console.writeLine, Emerald Knight. All right, and then the case else, we could just say console.writeLine, not found, okay? And then here we'll do the console.readline, and that should end the program. So now let's run the application. And yes, admittedly, we are using magic strings, but you can see the elegance of and how quickly we were able to create a select case statement. Whoops, couldn't find it because I didn't type it correctly. See, therein lies one of the problems. But how quickly I was able to create a select case statement as opposed to using the if, else if, else, end if statement. All right. So at any rate, now let me do this. Let's combine these two ideas together, the select case, our enumerations. So let me close this project down and reopen up the previous project that we had, the Understanding Enumerations. And I want to take a different tact than we did here. And I'm going to comment all that out. In fact, I'm just going to push it down here below. Whoops, I'm going to actually use that. And so we'll go select, tab, tab. We want to check my value, tab. Here we're going to go superhero.superman, superhero dot Batman. We'll go another case, superhero dot Green Lantern. All right. And here we would go the console.WriteLine, or I can just do something like a little bit easier. We'll just do dim result string, and then we'll do result equals Superman, or we could just do steel result equals Caped Crusader, result equals Green Lantern. All right, so then finally, let's just go ahead and go here at the bottom, console.WriteLine result, and we should get the same results. Okay, Batman. All right, so it's a little tidier. You can see there's just a little bit less code involved than if we do the else if my value equals each time. And so for simple cases, this will suffice. We could also just put everything here on one line to even make it more compact by using that line ending character, the colon, so we can keep it real nice and tight like that. But at any rate, you can see how they're used together then in these situations. Okay, so that's really all that I wanted to demonstrate here. We talked about the value of enumerations to limit and constrain the kind of data or the amount of data that can be assigned to a given property. We looked at a couple of examples of that. Then we looked at how we were able to utilize the select case as opposed to the if statement in those situations where we just want to evaluate one particular value against a number of potential cases, as we saw here, and then take some action, some simple action based on that. It's a little less verbose than the if statement, if, else, and so on. And we looked at some complex if statements and a few other things like try parse, which allows us to attempt to, in this particular case, take a string that the user typed in and find a match for it in our enumerations. If it returns true that we did find a match, then we'll execute this code. But if it didn't find a match, it'll just skip over the entire, all the logic that we wrote inside that code block. Okay, so doing great. Let's continue. See you in the next video. Thanks.